The house smelled like cedar and old paper on the morning everything changed. It was the kind of smell that had taken me 2 years to stop noticing. The particular combination of the cedar chest Renata kept in the front hallway, and the stacks of Portland Tribune back issues her late husband had never thrown away, still piled in the sunroom like a monument to a man none of us were allowed to forget. The sunroom faced east, and in the early hours the light came through at a low angle and caught the dust floating above those stacks, and for a few minutes each morning the whole room looked like something out of a photograph rather than a real place where real people lived and ate and quietly resented one another. I had learned to make coffee at 6:15 before anyone else was up. Not because I was a morning person, I wasn't, particularly, but because those 40 minutes before the house woke were the only 40 minutes in the day that belonged entirely to me. I'd stand at the kitchen window with my mug and watch the neighbor's dog patrol the fence line, and I'd run through the numbers in my head the way some people run through prayers. The lease agreement, the utility split, the grocery average, the maintenance fund, the $12,000 that left my account on the first of every month like clockwork, quiet as a tide going out. My name is Presley Kane. I was 34 years old, and I had been living in my mother-in-law's house for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters when you are the person whose name does not appear on the mailbox, whose car is parked on the street because the garage belongs to the family, whose coffee is the good kind because you learned early that small contributions go unacknowledged unless they are sensory and immediate. Precision matters when you are the invisible architecture holding up a house that does not know you are holding it. My husband, Colton Beaumont Kane, had suggested we move in with his mother 18 months after we married. His pitch had been practical. Renata was 67, recently widowed, and the house on Arbor Glen Drive was too large for one person. We had been renting a 2-bedroom in the Pearl District that cost more than it should have, and Colton's landscape architecture firm had just taken on a major contract in the Willamette Valley that required long drives and long hours. It made sense, he said. It was temporary, he said. A year, maybe 18 months, while we saved and Renata adjusted to living alone and we figured out what came next. That was 28 months ago. I had agreed because I loved Colton, and because I believed in the version of the future he described when he was enthusiastic about something. His hands moving, his voice dropping into that lower register he used when he was genuinely excited rather than performing excitement. I also agreed because I understood, without it ever being said directly, that Renata was struggling in ways that went beyond logistics. The grief was real. The house was large and the silences in it were the wrong shape. Whatever friction lived between Renata and me, and there had always been friction, fine-grained and consistent, like sand in a hinge, it did not seem like a reason to leave a 67-year-old woman alone in a house full of her late husband's newspapers. So we stayed. And I paid. The arrangement had begun informally. Colton had offered his mother a sum that covered the utilities and groceries, a figure he named over dinner one Sunday that I thought was reasonable, but that Renata had accepted with the particular silence of someone who finds a gift slightly beneath expectation. I had not said anything then. I smoothed the hem of my cardigan and waited. 3 weeks later I had gone through the actual numbers. The mortgage Renata still carried on the property taxes for Multnomah County, the homeowner's insurance, the quarterly pest service, the landscaping, the internet, the gas, the water, the quarterly furnace maintenance, the replacement of the water heater that happened in month 4, the groceries for 3 adults eating dinner together 6 nights out of 7, and I had come to a number that was very different from the one Colton had named. I had transferred the difference into Renata's account without discussing it with her. I had mentioned it to Colton, who had nodded in the way he nodded when he was grateful, but did not know how to fold gratitude into the shape his family had taught him was appropriate for men to carry. He had squeezed my shoulder. He had said, "You're good to her." I had said, "It's the right number." And that had been, apparently, enough. Over the following months, the $12,000 became its own kind of fact. It was not a rent check, there was no lease, no agreement, no document with both our names on it. It was a monthly transfer with a memo line I had started writing as household contribution, and then, after month 6, had stopped writing anything on at all, because the memo line felt like a request for acknowledgement that I had decided I did not need. The money left. The house ran. That was the arrangement. Renata knew the money was coming in. She had to, it arrived in her account and the account was hers. But I had never sat across from her at the kitchen table and said the number out loud. I had never handed her a statement or a summary. The money was the money, and the house was the house, and the two things existed in the same polite silence that governed most of what Renata and I did not discuss. What she did not know, what I was almost certain she did not know, based on the way she spoke about the house and its expenses when her older son Garrett visited, was the actual figure. She referred, in those conversations, to what Colton and Presley chip in a tone that suggested she was describing a gesture rather than a subsidy. The first time I heard her use that phrase, I was in the kitchen and they were in the sitting room and I had been reaching for a glass and I stopped with my hand on the cabinet door and I listened to the particular shape of those words, chip in, and I understood something about how the arrangement was being narrated in Renata's mind. I set the glass down. I didn't say anything. I went back to what I was doing. There were 28 months between that moment and the morning everything changed, and those 28 months had their own texture, the way long arrangements do when you live inside them long enough that the walls stop looking like walls and start looking like the shape of the world. I want to describe one of them. Not because it was exceptional, but because it was ordinary, and ordinary is what accumulates. It was a Thursday in March of our second year, a workday, Colton 3 hours south in the Willamette Valley on the contract that kept him gone 2 and sometimes 3 nights a week. I was working from the office upstairs. I do data analysis for a healthcare consulting firm, remote, which was part of why the arrangement had been easy to sustain logistically, because I did not need to be anywhere in particular to do my job, which also meant I was available in ways that people who go to offices are not. Available to take the call from the furnace company about the annual inspection. Available to let the pest service in on the second Tuesday of each month. Available to hear, at 10:40 on this particular Thursday morning, a sound from the upstairs bathroom that was not a normal sound. The outlet behind the vanity had stopped working sometime overnight. I discovered this because the lamp on the bathroom counter, the one Renata used for her morning routine, a small gooseneck thing she was particular about, was not working, and Renata was at the door of the upstairs bathroom, which shared a wall with the office where I was working, saying, in the direction of no one specific because Colton was not home and she had perhaps forgotten I was, "The power is out in here. Something's wrong with the power." I saved my work. I came out of the office. I looked at the outlet. I went downstairs and checked the breaker panel in the basement. The one behind the shelving unit in the laundry room, which required moving a folded card table to access, and which Colton had been meaning to label properly since month 2 but had not. The breaker was not tripped. The outlet was simply dead. I came back upstairs. I told Renata it wasn't the breaker, it was probably the outlet itself, and that I would call an electrician. She said, "Colton usually handles things like that." I said, "Colton's in the valley. I'll get someone out today." I called. I got a same-day appointment because I was flexible about the window. The electrician arrived at 2, replaced a faulty GFCI outlet, was in and out in 40 minutes. I paid $190 on my card, parts plus labor, and I wrote the amount on a post-it note and added it to the accordion folder that was, at that point, only 4 months old and already holding more than I had expected it to hold. That evening I made dinner. Renata ate and complimented the chicken and did not mention the outlet. Colton called from the valley at 7:30 and I mentioned it and he said, "Oh, good catch, I've been meaning to check that." "Thanks, President." I said, "It's handled." He said, "You're a rock." And then he told me about the contract and the client and the drive back and I listened and the accordion folder sat in my desk drawer and the receipt inside it made no sound. That was a Thursday in March. There were 27 other months that had Thursdays in them with the same texture or close enough. Garrett Beaumont was 41, 6 years older than Colton, and he had the confident looseness of a man who had never been asked to justify his presence anywhere. He was a commercial real estate broker in Sacramento, which meant he made money in the way that seemed to Renata like the correct way for a Beaumont man to make money. Visibly, in transactions, in the kind of deals you could describe at dinner in 3 sentences that made people nod. He visited Portland 4 or 5 times a year with his wife, Tamsin, who was pleasant and decorative and had opinions about kitchen renovations that she delivered as though they were objective assessments rather than preferences. I did not dislike Garrett. I want to be fair about that. He was not cruel in the way that requires effort. He was cruel in the easier way, the way of a person who simply does not register you as someone whose experience has weight. He would walk through the house the way you walk through a hotel lobby. noting what he found useful or adequate or slightly below standard, and his mother would follow him through each room with an expression I had learned to read as hope. She wanted him to approve. She had always wanted him to approve. That was its own kind of information. The last visit before the one that changed everything had been 4 months prior, in June. I remember it specifically because of the kitchen. It was a Saturday morning and I had been up early, 6:15 as usual, and I had made the good coffee and cleaned the stovetop, which had collected, over the previous week, the particular combination of grease and splatter that stovetops accumulate in households that cook regularly, which this one did because I cooked regularly, 6 dinners out of 7, occasionally 7. I had used the degreaser I kept under the sink and the specific sponge I kept separate from the other sponges, and I had gotten the stovetop to the condition it had been in when we moved in, which was not its natural state anymore because it had been used daily for 2 years by a woman who was a good cook but not a careful one. Garrett had come downstairs at 8 and poured himself coffee and looked at the kitchen with the hotel lobby gaze and said, to no one in particular, "Kitchen looks good." And Renata, who had appeared in the doorway at almost the same moment, said, "I try to keep it up." And I was at the table with my laptop open and I did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would have cost less than saying nothing. I write this down not because Garrett or Renata were being deliberately dishonest. I write it because that is what invisible labor looks like from the outside. It looks like the natural state of things. It looks like the kitchen has always been this clean. It looks like the stovetop cleans itself. It looks like the house runs on its own momentum, and the person running it is simply present in the background, part of the furniture, part of the ambient hum of a household that has no particular reason to acknowledge what keeps it going because it has always, apparently, been going fine. The morning Renata told me to leave, Garrett and Tamsin had arrived the night before. I had made dinner, salmon with a fennel and citrus salad, a thing I had learned to make because Colton loved it and because it was the kind of meal that made the kitchen smell like intention rather than routine. I had set the table with the good plates, the ones Renata kept in the upper cabinet and brought out for the children who called ahead. I had opened a bottle of Willamette Valley Pinot that I'd been keeping for a decent occasion. None of this was noted. Tamsin asked if there was a lighter dressing option for the salad. She asked it in the particular way of someone who has decided the question is neutral, which made it the opposite of neutral, and I said I could bring out olive oil and lemon separately, and she said that would be wonderful, and I went back to the kitchen to get them and stood at the counter for a moment with my hands on the edge of it before I picked up what she'd asked for and went back out. Garrett asked Colton, across the table, whether the firm was staying busy enough. He asked it in the tone of an older brother who has decided that his younger brother's professional choices are a matter of ongoing assessment rather than settled fact, and Colton answered in the measured way he answered that particular question, which was with evidence. The Willamette Valley contract, a new residential project in Lake Oswego, the hire he was considering. Garrett nodded at each item the way you nod when you are listening for the thing that will allow you to offer an opinion. He found it in the hire. He said, "You want to be careful about overhead when you're still at your stage." Colton said, "I know." Garrett nodded again, satisfied. Renata told a long story about the neighbor's tree and the branch that had dropped on the fence. She told it with the detail of someone for whom a domestic incident involving a fence has become the kind of event that requires a narrative, and Garrett said he knew a contractor in the area if she needed one, and Tamsin said the neighbor should really be responsible for the cost, and I passed the bread and said, at the appropriate intervals and ate the salmon I had made and watched the evening move around the table the way evenings in that house moved, dense with things unsaid and me. Moving through them with the particular skill I had developed for being present and invisible at the same time. After dinner I had washed the good plates by hand because Renata did not trust them to the dishwasher, and Colton had taken Garrett to the garage to look at something, and Tamsin had gone upstairs, and Renata had stood in the kitchen doorway watching me work without offering to help. Which was not unusual, she had never offered to help with the good plates, this was a known quantity, and then she had said, in a conversational tone, as though we were discussing the weather, "Garrett and Tamsin are thinking about starting a family." I had kept my hands in the soapy water. "That's wonderful," I said. "They need space," Renata said. "A proper home. Not an apartment." I had turned off the tap. I had reached for the dish towel on the oven handle and dried my hands with the particular attention you give a task when you need something to do with your body. "Of course," I said. This house has 4 bedrooms, Renata said. And 2 of them are being used by you and Colton for an office and I don't know what you call it, a sitting room. She said sitting room in a way that suggested the concept was mildly pretentious when applied to a space you had not grown up in. The nursery was always meant to be the 4th bedroom. You know that. I did know that. The 4th bedroom had a window that faced the backyard, maple and yellow curtains that had never been changed, and I had understood from the first month that it was not a room I was meant to use or reconfigure. I had not used it or reconfigured it. I had kept the door shut and treated the room the way you treat a room in a house that belongs to someone else, because it did and because I was not confused about that. I'm not suggesting anything permanent, Renata said. I'm just thinking practically. The way the house is used right now, it works for the 4 of us, but with a baby, and with Garrett needing to be closer to his mother. She paused. He worries about me, you know. Since his father. I know he does, I said. It would just make more sense, she said, if you and Colton found a place of your own. You've been talking about it, haven't you? Finding a place. We had been talking about it. That was true. It had been the conversation that circled back every few months and never quite landed, the way plans sometimes behave when the people making them are comfortable enough that urgency doesn't arrive naturally. I had pushed for it more than Colton had. I had kept a folder on my laptop with listings I'd flagged in the Irvington neighborhood and along the east side of the river, properties in the $600,000 to $800,000 range that were within reach given what we'd been saving. Every time I opened the folder I felt something I did not have a name for. A pulling toward, a readiness, and every time I mentioned it to Colton he said yes, soon, let's look this weekend, and the weekend would arrive and there would be something else. None of that was what Renata was doing right now. What Renata was doing right now was something different. When were you thinking? I asked. My voice stayed even. The dish towel was still in my hands and I set it down on the counter because I wanted my hands free. Renata's chin lifted slightly. Garrett and Tamsin are here through next weekend. I thought, if you could start looking seriously, getting your things organized, it doesn't have to be immediate. A month, maybe 6 weeks. A month. Maybe 6 weeks. I looked at her for a moment. She was wearing the blue cardigan she wore most evenings, the one with the small wooden buttons, and her expression had the particular quality of a person who has prepared a speech and is now delivering it with the conviction that preparation confers rightness. She believed she was being reasonable. I could see that. She believed she was handling something practical in a practical way, and the fact that 2 of the rooms she was casually reclaiming housed a person who had been covering her property taxes and homeowner's insurance for 28 months was not a piece of information she appeared to be carrying in any meaningful way. I'll talk to Colton, I said. I've already mentioned it to Colton, she said. I absorbed that. When? This afternoon. Before dinner. She tilted her head slightly. He agreed it made sense. That you'd been meaning to find a place anyway. The kitchen was very quiet. I could hear the water still in the pipes from the tap I'd turned off. I could hear the low murmur of Colton's voice from the garage and Garrett's laugh, the short, satisfied one, and then silence again. The salmon smell was still in the air, fennel and citrus and the good olive oil I bought from the market on Burnside, and it struck me, standing in that kitchen, that I had spent 28 months making this house run and not 1 minute of that effort had left a mark on the way Renata understood what she was asking me to give back. I didn't fill the silence. Renata took the silence as agreement, or something close enough to it. She said good night. She went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen for a while longer, my hand resting on the edge of the counter, and I looked at the good plates drying in the rack, and I thought about the folder on my laptop, and I thought about the first of the month and the number that left my account as silently and as certainly as the tide. Then I went to find Colton. He was still in the garage with Garrett. I stood in the doorway. The door from the kitchen to the garage, the one with the sticky handle that I had reported to Renata twice and that had never been fixed, and I looked at my husband, who was laughing at something his brother had said, and I waited until there was a natural break in the conversation before I said his name. He turned. His expression when he saw mine shifted, not dramatically, but the way a landscape shifts when a cloud moves across it, a cooling and a shadow that passed quickly. "Hey," he said. "Come in." "In a minute," I said. Can I talk to you? Garrett had the grace to become very interested in something on the workbench. Colton followed me back into the kitchen. The door with the sticky handle closed behind us. She talked to you, I said. Yeah. He had his hands in his pockets. Press. Before dinner, I said. You knew before dinner. I was going to tell you tonight. I was waiting for the right moment. And you agreed with her. He exhaled. I didn't disagree. I said we'd been thinking about it anyway, which we have, and that we'd figure it out. He looked at me with the expression I had come to know as his conflict expression, genuine discomfort, genuine affection, and a deep structural reluctance to place himself between two people who both had claims on him. It doesn't have to be a big deal. We can find something good. The market's actually... Colton, I said. My voice was quiet. Do you know how much I've been paying your mother every month? He looked at me. The utilities and... The number, I said. The actual number. He was quiet for a moment. I know you said it was the right amount for everything. It's $12,000, I said. Every month. For 28 months. The number landed in the kitchen the way a heavy object lands, not loudly but with a solidity that changed the shape of the air. Colton's hands came out of his pockets. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before, something between recalibration and what I could only read as the beginning of understanding, though whether it was understanding of the money or of the larger shape of what had been happening in this house for more than 2 years. He opened his mouth. Behind us, from the front of the house, we heard Garrett's voice and then Renata's, and then footsteps on the stairs, and then the sound of the upstairs hallway, and then quiet. And Colton stood in the kitchen of his mother's house with his hands at his sides and his mouth slightly open, and I watched him decide what to say next, and I waited. Colton said, 12,000. It wasn't a question. It was the sound a person makes when a number they have been holding at a comfortable distance suddenly arrives in the room with them and takes up the space it actually occupies. Every month, I said. Since month 3. He sat down at the kitchen table. Not dramatically, he didn't pull the chair out with any force or drop into it. He simply sat, the way you sit when your legs make the decision before your mind does. His hands went flat on the table surface, and he looked at them for a moment, and I stayed where I was near the counter because I didn't want to be at the table yet. I wanted to be able to see his face from a distance. I knew you were paying more than what I said, he told me. I assumed. He stopped. I didn't ask. No, I said. Why didn't you tell me the number? It was a fair question, and I had thought about it, in the way you think about things you have decided not to examine too closely. The honest answer was that I had not told him because telling him would have required a conversation about what the number meant, and what the number meant was that his mother's house ran on my money more than on anything else, and that conversation had a shape that I hadn't been ready to navigate. I had been protecting something, the arrangement or the piece, or possibly Colton's ability to believe he was contributing more than he was. I wasn't sure which. Maybe all 3. I should have, I said. That's on me. He looked up. Don't do that. Do what? Make it smaller than it is so I don't have to feel bad about it. I looked at him across the kitchen. Okay, I said. Then feel bad about it. He did. I could see it, the particular quality of his stillness, the way his jaw tightened and released. He was a man who had been raised in a house where discomfort was managed rather than held, where the correct response to an uncomfortable truth was to find the practical path through it as quickly as possible, and I watched him resist that habit now. It cost him something. I gave him credit for that. I'll talk to her, he said finally. I'll tell her, I'll explain what you've been contributing, and I'll tell her that 6 weeks isn't. I don't want you to fight with your mother, I said. Presley. I mean it. Not yet. I picked up my mug from the counter. The coffee in it had gone cold while I was doing dishes. I drank it anyway. Let me think about how I want to handle this. Give me a day or 2. He looked at me with an expression I recognized, the one that meant he was trying to determine whether I was being genuinely calm or performing calm, and wasn't sure which answer he wanted. "You're not upset," he said, and it landed somewhere between observation and question. "I'm something," I said. "I haven't decided what yet." I went to bed before he did. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle. The cedar chest in the hallway, the furnace cycling on in the basement, the particular creak of the third stair from the top that I had learned to step over because Renata was a light sleeper and I had, without ever being asked, adjusted my movements to the acoustics of a house that did not belong to me. I thought about $12,000 multiplied by 28, and I arrived at $336,000, and I held that number in the dark the way you hold a stone, feeling its weight, its edges, the specific density of it. I did not sleep well. But I did sleep. The second cruelty came the next morning, and it did not come from Renata. I was up at 6:15 as usual. The dog across the fence was doing its patrol. The sunroom light was doing its thing with the dust above the newspaper stacks. I was standing at the kitchen window with the good coffee, the Stumptown beans I ordered online and kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator, because Renata bought the canned kind and I had learned to maintain my own supply without comment, when I heard footsteps on the stairs that were not Renata's. Garrett came into the kitchen in a gray pullover and athletic shorts, moving with the easy authority of a man who treats every kitchen as an extension of his own. He went to the coffee maker, saw my Stumptown already brewed in the French press, and poured himself a mug without asking. I watched him do this the way you watch weather. Something moving in a direction it was always going to move, requiring no particular response from you, only attention. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I said. He leaned against the opposite counter and drank and looked at me with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was assessing in a way that felt like something he had decided to do before coming downstairs. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," I said. "You?" "Good." He set the mug down. "Listen, Presley. About what my mom mentioned last night." "We're figuring it out," I said. "Good." He nodded, but he didn't stop. "I want you to know I think it's the right move. For everyone." He said for everyone with the particular confidence of a man who has decided that his preference and universal benefit are the same thing. "Colton's been," he paused, selected something. "Colton's been comfortable here. Maybe too comfortable. You two should have your own place. Build something." "We've been building something," I said. My voice was steady. "Here." He looked at me briefly, then away, in the way people look away from things that inconvenience the point they're trying to make. "Sure. But this is my mother's house. She needs to be able to use it the way she wants to. She's been incredibly generous letting you." He stopped. He had, I think, heard the word he was about to use and thought better of it. "Letting you. Letting me." I watched him redirect. "She's been happy to have you here," he said. "But things change." The kitchen was very quiet. I could hear the French press still releasing small puffs of steam. I counted the pause instead of answering it, and in the pause I looked at Garrett Beaumont, 41 years old, commercial real estate broker, 6 feet and easy in his skin, and I thought about the word he had stopped himself from saying, and I thought about the fact that his mother had gone to him before going to Colton, had scripted this conversation with him first, had sent him down the stairs this morning the way you send someone you trust to handle a negotiation you don't want to conduct. "Yourself. Is Tamsin actually pregnant?" I asked. Something moved across his face. "Not yet. They're planning. So this is preemptive." "It's practical," he said. The word landed the same way Renata had landed it the night before, practical as a synonym for already decided. The timeline is flexible, but the direction isn't. Mom's made up her mind. "When did she make it up?" I asked. "Before or after you arrived?" He picked up his mug again. "I think this is a conversation you should have with Colton." "I'm having it with you," I said. "Since you're the one who came down here at 6:30 to have it." His eyes went slightly flat, not angry, not exactly, but recalibrated. He set the mug down again and straightened up from the counter. "My mother asked me to make sure everyone's on the same page. I'm making sure." "Everyone," I said. "Meaning me." "Meaning the household," he said. Then, She loves you, Presley. This isn't personal. I looked at him. I thought about what it would mean to say what I wanted to say right now. To name the number, to place it between us in this kitchen the way I had placed it between me and Colton the night before. I thought about the particular quality of the silence that would follow. Garrett was a commercial real estate broker. He understood numbers. He would understand $336,000 in a way Renata might not, immediately and structurally, and the understanding would travel across his face in a way I could watch. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Tell your mother I'll talk to her this afternoon, I said. I turned back to the window. After a moment, I heard him pour the rest of my French press into his mug and take it upstairs. I went for a walk. It was the thing I did when I needed to think without the house listening. Arbor Glen Drive in October had a particular quality. The maples had gone copper and gold, and the morning light came through them at a sideways angle that made the whole street look warmer than it was. I walked 6 blocks to the small park at the end of the drive, and I sat on the bench near the water feature, which was turned off for the season, and I thought. I thought about month 3. The reason I had started paying $12,000 rather than the amount Colton had named was specific. I had found a bill. I had not been looking for it, I want to be precise about that. I had been cleaning out the kitchen junk drawer, the one that everyone puts things in and no one ever addresses, and I had been filling a garbage bag with expired coupons and dead batteries and the accumulated paper residue of a household that doesn't throw things away, when my hand had closed around a folded envelope from the Multnomah County Tax Assessor's office. The reach was automatic, fingers finding the envelope, pulling it free of the rubber bands and takeout menus around it. I had taken it out and unfolded it on the kitchen counter, and what I found was a property tax statement for 22 Arbor Glen Drive, and the number on the statement was not a number that the household contribution Colton had named was touching in any meaningful way. The taxes alone were $8,400 for the year. The insurance renewal notice I found behind it, same drawer, same week, different envelope, was $3,200. The quarterly furnace service contract was tacked to the inside of the cabinet above the junk drawer with a piece of painter's tape, and it was $1,100 a year. I had laid all 3 documents on the counter. I had stood back and looked at them. Then I had gotten a legal pad from Colton's office, and I had written the numbers down in a column, and I had added them to the utilities and the groceries for 3 adults and the bi-weekly cleaning service that Renata had maintained since before her husband died, and I had arrived at a number that made the arrangement make sense. That was the afternoon I opened my laptop and set up the standing transfer. I had never shown anyone those documents. I had put the tax statement and the insurance renewal back in the junk drawer because they were not mine to keep, and I had folded up my legal pad and put it in my own files. In the accordion folder I kept in the top drawer of my desk in the room we used as an office, the folder I labeled household with a strip of painter's tape and a Sharpie, the folder that had grown, over 28 months, into something more substantial than a single afternoon's arithmetic. I thought about that folder now. I thought about what was in it. Monthly transfer confirmations. 28 of them, printed and dated and paper-clipped by quarter. The original property tax statement. The insurance renewal. A receipt for the water heater replacement, $2,800, which I had paid directly to the plumber because Renata had called Colton in a panic at 7 in the morning, and Colton had been 3 hours south in the Willamette Valley, and I had been the one home, the one who had called the service, the one who had handed over my card at the end of the job and filled in the paperwork. A receipt for the gutter cleaning in the spring of last year. A receipt for the electrician, $190, the faulty outlet behind the bathroom vanity that had been quietly dead for who knew how long before I noticed it, and made the call and moved the card table in front of the breaker panel and waited the 2-hour service window alone on a Thursday. A receipt for the dryer vent cleaning that the fire department's community notice had recommended and that I had scheduled and overseen because someone needed to, and the someone available was me. $40 for the bird feeder I'd replaced after the raccoon incident. The pest service quarterly invoices, 8 of them, because Renata had let the account lapse when Warren died, and restarting it had required a credit card on file, and mine was the one I'd offered because it was the one I had in my hand. 28 months of a house running on money and attention that were invisible because I had never made them visible. I sat on the bench near the dry water feature and I thought about Garrett coming downstairs at 6:30 in his athletic shorts to tell me that this wasn't personal. Then I took out my phone and I called my grandmother. Her name was Magnolia Kane. My father's mother, 81 years old, living in a senior community in Tacoma that she had selected herself and that she paid for herself and that she was aggressively pleased with, in the way she was aggressively pleased with everything she had chosen deliberately. She had opinions about most things, and she delivered them with the precision of a woman who had stopped being interested in softening things somewhere around her late 60s. She picked up on the second ring. Presley Ray. "Hi, Gran. You're outside," she said. "I can hear the leaves. I'm at the park. It's 7 in the morning. I know." A pause. "Tell me." I told her. I told her about Renata's conversation in the kitchen. Not the summary of it, but the actual shape of it, the prepared quality of Renata's speech, the blue cardigan, the way she had said sitting room. I told her about Garrett and the French press and the word he'd stopped himself from saying. I told her about the for everyone, the it's practical, the she's been incredibly generous, the way he had redirected himself from letting you to she's been happy to have you, as though the sentence had never started where it started. "And he came down before anyone else was up," I said. "He had the whole thing ready. She sent him." "Of course she did," Magnolia said. She said it the way you say a thing that isn't surprising but still requires saying. "And Colton?" "Last night," I said. I told him the number. I paused. He sat down. She made a sound. Not quite agreement, not quite dismissal. The sound she made when she was categorizing something, filing it alongside things she had already understood for a long time. What was his reaction after he sat down? He said he should have asked. He didn't disagree with me that the number was real. He said he'd talk to her. I pressed my thumb against the edge of my phone case. I told him not to yet. "Good," she said. "What do you want to do, Presley Ray? Not what's fair. Not what Colton should do. What do you want?" "I want to leave," I said. "I've been ready to leave. I've had listings saved for 8 months. "Good," she said. "Leave." "But I don't want to leave quietly," I said. The silence on the line changed quality. Magnolia Kane did not fill silences she found interesting. She let them be what they were. "No," she said after a moment. "I don't imagine you do." "I want her to know the number," I said. "The real number. I want Garrett to understand what chip-in actually means. I want Colton to." I stopped. "I want the thing I've been doing to be legible. Just once. I want it to exist somewhere other than my accordion folder." "You have the records," she said. "Every one of them." "I have every one of them." "Then don't have a conversation," she said. Her voice was measured and precise in the way it was when she was saying something she had thought about for longer than the conversation had been going on. "Have a presentation." I let that sit. The maple above the bench dropped a leaf and it came down slow, the way they do when the air is still, rocking side to side until it landed on the ground next to my foot. "I'm going to need a few days," I said. "Take them," she said. "But Presley," her voice shifted a half step lower. "Call your bank today. And look at that transfer history carefully. All of it. Don't just look at what you've paid out." "What do you mean?" She paused in a way that was different from her usual pauses. More considered. Like she was deciding how much of the map to give me and had settled on the part that would make me look for myself. "Just look at everything," she said. "Your grandmother knows a few things about what happens when one person handles another family's money without a formal arrangement." I almost asked her what she meant specifically. But there was something in the way she'd said it. Look at everything, not look at the transfers, that made me hold the question and sit with it instead. "I'll call you tonight," I said. "You will," she agreed and hung up. I sat for another few minutes in the cold October air. The bench was damp from overnight fog that hadn't fully burned off yet, and the cold of it had worked through my coat while I'd been sitting, and I became aware of it all at once the way you become aware of discomfort when the thing you were attending to resolves, and there is nothing left to focus on but the physical world. I stood up, straightened my coat, and took out my phone. I opened my banking app. I scrolled back through the transfer history, not just the outgoing transfers but all of it the way Magnolia had said. Outgoing, Incoming account activity. The 28 transfers leaving my account on the 1st of each month, each one $12,000, each one arriving in Renata's account like a tide going out. I knew those. I did not need to count them. I scrolled past them. I scrolled to the incoming column. On page 3 of the statement history, I found something. It was a small thing. The kind of thing that is easy to miss if you are looking at one column instead of two. A $600 transfer, incoming, dated 14 months ago, from an account labeled BML Holdings LLC, an account name I did not recognize, a transfer I had no memory of initiating or expecting, that had arrived in my personal checking account and been quietly absorbed into the flow of the month without my registering it. I stared at it. I scrolled further. Another one 11 months ago. $600. Same source. BML Holdings, LLC. My thumb hovered over the screen. The maple above me dropped another leaf. I did not know what BML Holdings, LLC was. I did not know why it had sent me $1,200 across 2 separate months 14 and 11 months ago. I did not know whether it was a glitch, a mislabeled transfer, a mistake from my bank, or something else entirely. Something that had arrived in my account from a direction I wasn't looking. But I knew who I was going to ask. Not Colton. Not yet. I closed the app and stood up from the bench and began the 6-block walk back to Arbor Glen Drive, and the October light came through the copper maples and lay across the sidewalk in long strips, and my mind was moving fast and quiet the way it moved when something needed to be understood before it could be used. The walk back took 6 minutes. I used them. By the time I turned onto Arbor Glen Drive, I had decided 2 things. I would not mention the BML transfers to Colton until I understood what they were, and I would not go back into that house and pretend the morning had been ordinary. Both decisions came from the same place. The part of me that had learned, over 28 months of invisible labor, that the moment you name something before you understand it is the moment you lose the ability to use it. The house looked the same as it always did from the street. 2-story craftsman, the original fir porch columns Renata's husband had refinished himself before he died, window boxes with the last of the season's dahlias going rust and brown. It was a beautiful house. I had always thought it was a beautiful house, which was part of why the arrangement had been easy to talk myself into staying in. Beautiful houses have a gravitational pull that has nothing to do with who lives in them or who pays for them. Colton's truck was still in the driveway. Garrett's rental was behind it. I had been gone 45 minutes. I went in through the front door and I could hear voices in the kitchen, Renata's and Tamsin's, and the particular domestic register of women conducting a conversation over coffee that they would adjust if they heard you coming. I didn't announce myself. I went upstairs to the office and I closed the door. The accordion folder was in the top drawer of my desk where I always kept it. I reached in and pulled it out. The whole thing, all 8 sections of it, paper-clipped by quarter and labeled in the same Sharpie handwriting I'd used on the tab. I set it on the desk and I opened my laptop and I pulled up my banking portal and I took a legal pad from the stack on the shelf and I wrote at the top, in clean capital letters, BML Holdings, LLC. Then I searched it. The Oregon Secretary of State's business registry was public and searchable. I found BML Holdings, LLC in under a minute. It had been registered in Oregon 14 years ago. Its registered agent was a law firm in Portland, Kastner and Bryce, a small firm downtown that handled estate and business matters. Its listed manager was a name I did not know, Warren L. Beaumont. I read that name twice. Warren L. Beaumont had died 3 years ago. He was Colton's father. He was Renata's husband. He was the man whose newspapers were still stacked in the sunroom. I sat with that for a moment. I could hear the furnace cycling in the basement. Somewhere below me, Tamsin laughed at something Renata said, and the sound came up through the floor the way sound does in old houses, intimate and slightly distorted. Warren Beaumont had owned a limited liability company. That was not by itself remarkable. The man had been a contractor and developer for 30 years before his retirement. It was entirely plausible that he had maintained a business entity for tax or estate purposes. What was less plausible, what was the thing I was sitting with, was why that entity had sent me $600 twice 14 and 11 months ago without my knowledge or any apparent reason. I wrote the law firm's name on the legal pad. I wrote the registration date. I wrote the 2 transfer amounts and their dates. I drew a line across the page, and under it I wrote the only question that mattered: who authorized those transfers and why? Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not Renata's careful tread and not Tamsin's lighter step, but the particular flat-footed weight of Garrett, who walked like a man who had never learned to be quiet in a house that wasn't his. He knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for an answer. I closed my laptop. Not quickly, deliberately, the way you close something when you want the person watching to know you've made the decision to close it. I set my pen down on the legal pad face up, which I also did deliberately. He could see the words on it if he looked. I wanted to know if he looked. He looked. His eyes went to the legal pad and back to me in less than a second, long enough to register and short enough to pretend he hadn't. He left the door open behind him, which I noted, and he put his hands in the pockets of the same athletic shorts and stood in the middle of my office like he was assessing square footage. "Got a minute?" he said. "Sure," I said. "Mom's pretty upset," he said. "She says you didn't come down to breakfast." "I went for a walk," I said. "She thinks you're angry." "I've been upstairs for 30 minutes, I said. "Working." He looked at the legal pad again, more openly this time. "What are you working on?" "Paperwork," I said. His jaw shifted slightly. He moved to the chair on the other side of my desk, Colton's chair, the one with the good lumbar support that I had ordered for him because he complained about his back during long drafting sessions, and he sat down in it without asking. "Presley, I want to talk to you straight." "All right," I said. "I came down early this morning to give you a heads up before this became a bigger thing than it needs to be," he said. "Mom made a decision. It's her house. I think you know that even if it feels unfair right now." "I know it's her house," I said. "Then you know she has the right to decide who lives in it." "She does," I said. He paused, as if expecting friction and encountering the absence of it. "I'm glad we agree on that." "I didn't say I agreed," I said. "I said she has the right. Those aren't the same thing." He looked at me for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted slightly, still controlled but carrying something underneath it that was closer to authority than conversation. "Here's what I know. You and Colton have been here almost 2.5 years. Mom's been good to you. She gave you a place to live at a very reasonable cost while you saved up." "What cost did she charge us?" I asked. He blinked. "The arrangement. The household contribution, whatever." "What was the number, Garrett?" "I don't know the specific." "Take a guess," I said. He leaned back slightly in the chair. "Presley, I don't see what the specific." "Because I do," I said. "I see exactly what the specific number is, because I'm the one who calculated it and I'm the one who's been paying it." I let that land. "Your mother thinks we've been chipping in. Is that the word she used with you?" Something moved in his expression, a recognition quickly managed. "She mentioned you've been covering." $12,000 a month, I said. "Every month for 28 months. Property taxes, homeowner's insurance, utilities, groceries, the water heater, the gutters, the furnace contract, the electrical work upstairs. I have a record of every cent." I put my hand flat on the accordion folder. "Your mother's house has been running on my money for 2.5 years, and she's been describing it to you as chipping in." The room was quiet for a moment. I watched the arithmetic move across Garrett Beaumont's face. Involuntary, commercial real estate broker arithmetic, the kind you can't suppress when you understand what numbers mean. $336,000. I watched him arrive at it. His throat moved. He swallowed hard once and looked at the accordion folder with the particular attention of a man recalculating something he thought he already knew. "That can't be right," he said. "I'd be happy to show you the transfer confirmations," I said. "I have all 28 of them." "Why would you?" He stopped. Started again. "If you were paying that much, why wouldn't you have said something? To Mom, to Colton, to anyone?" "I said it to Colton last night," I said. "For the first time." Which tells you something about what kind of arrangement it actually was. He stood up. Not abruptly. He was too controlled for abrupt, but decisively, in the way that signaled a conversation being moved to a different footing. "I think this is something you and Colton need to sort out between yourselves," he said. "And I think you and Mom need to have a real conversation rather than—" "I'll have a conversation with your mother," I said. "I've been planning to." "Good." He moved toward the door. Then he stopped, and he turned back, and his voice had shifted again into the register I recognized from the kitchen that morning. The one that was not quite friendly and not quite adversarial but occupied the space between them with the particular confidence of someone who believes the outcome is already settled. "I'll say this, Presley. Whatever you think you're owed here, and I understand you feel like you've contributed, I do, this is still a family matter. Family takes care of family. You've been here as Colton's wife, as part of the family, and I know Mom's grateful for everything you've done. But this house belongs to the Beaumonts." He paused. "It always has, and it always will." He left the door open behind him. I heard him go down the stairs with the same flat-footed weight. "This house belongs to the Beaumonts. It always has, and it always will." I wrote it on the legal pad verbatim. Then I circled it. I stayed in the office. The flat-footed weight of Garrett's steps diminished down the staircase, and then the sound of the kitchen received him. The particular acoustic shift of a large man entering a room, and I could hear, muffled through the floor, the resumption of voices, Renata's and Tamsin's and now his, the household reconstituting itself around the assumption that the matter upstairs had been handled. I picked up my pen. First, I photographed every document in the accordion folder with my phone, all 28 transfer confirmations, the property tax statement, the insurance renewal, the water heater receipt, the gutter and electrical receipts, the furnace contract, the pest service invoices. I uploaded them to my cloud storage and organized them into a folder I labeled with the date. The photographs were clear and sequential, and each one showed a number and a date and a payee and a memo line or the absence of one. 28 months of a household economy that had no formal existence anywhere except in these pages and in my account history, and in the way this house had continued month after month to run. Second, I looked up Kastner and Bryce. Their website was minimal: 2 partners, estate and business law, appointments by phone or email. I sent an email from my personal address using the contact form, noting that I had a question about BML Holdings LLC and asking whether anyone at the firm could speak with me at their earliest convenience. I did not explain who I was or what my connection to the LLC might be. I was deliberately brief. I wanted to know what they said before they knew what I knew. Third, I opened my real estate folder and I looked at the listings I had saved. The one on Irvington I had flagged 8 months ago was still available. I had checked 2 weeks prior out of habit, the way you check a thing you've been waiting to be ready for. It was a 1920s bungalow on a corner lot, 3 bedrooms, original hardwood, a kitchen that had been updated without destroying its character. The listing price was $685,000. It had been on the market for 60 days and had dropped once, which meant the sellers were serious and the price had found its real level. I looked at the photographs in the listing, the kitchen specifically, and the east-facing window above the sink that the listing agent had photographed in morning light, the kind of light that comes through a window at a low angle and fills the room with something that is not warmth exactly but the specific color of warmth, amber in particular. I looked at that window for a long time. Then I heard Colton on the stairs, and a moment later he was in the doorway. He looked at the accordion folder on my desk and the legal pad beside it and my open laptop, and he came in and sat in his own chair, which was still slightly pulled out from where Garrett had left it. "Garrett talked to you," he said. "He did," I said. "He told me he came up here." Colton's voice had a quality I recognized, careful, preloaded with something he was deciding how to carry. "Press, I want to ask you something and I need you to answer me straight." "Okay," I said. "Did you know about my father's company?" He said, "BML Holdings." I looked at him. "What do you know about it?" "I know it exists," he said. "I know my father set it up a long time ago and that there was supposed to be something in it. For Garrett and me. Some kind of asset." He pressed his hands together on the desk. "Garrett mentioned it just now. Downstairs. He said something about it He stopped. "What did he say?" I asked. Colton was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. He said the company was dissolved. Last year. He said Dad's attorney handled the estate and there was nothing significant in it, just a holding structure for some old contracts, and that it had been wound down. He looked up at me. But, Presley, I know he said that to me 2 years ago too. After the estate settled. He told me the same thing then. I turned my laptop toward him. I had the Oregon Business Registry still open. BML Holdings, LLC. Status, active. Last annual report filed, 7 months ago. Colton looked at the screen for a long time without speaking. His eyes moved across the information. The registration date, the registered agent, the status field, and then back to the top, and then across it again. His breathing was even, but his jaw had gone tight in the way it went when he was working to keep his face from doing what it wanted to do. It's not dissolved, I said. No, he said. It's not. The sound from downstairs had changed. Fewer voices, the clink of dishes being rinsed, the domestic wind down of a morning in a house where several people were pretending that the morning was ordinary. I could hear Renata's voice and then Tamsin's, but not Garrett's, which meant Garrett was somewhere in the house being quiet in a way he had not been quiet all morning. The transfers to my account, I said. The 2 payments from BML. 14 months ago and 11 months ago. $600 each. Colton stared at me. Transfers to your account. They came in as BML Holdings, LLC. I don't know what they were for. I don't know who authorized them. I watched his face. Do you? He shook his head slowly. Not the shake of someone who is lying, but the slower, heavier shake of someone encountering a fact that requires them to reorganize several other facts around it. I've never had anything to do with the company. I didn't even know it was still. My father handled all of it, and when he died, Garrett handled the estate. He's the older son. He was the executor. He stopped. Something in his face had gone very still. He was the executor. The word landed in the room and stayed there. I picked up my pen. I sent an email to your father's attorney this morning. Colton looked at me. Kastner and Bryce. You know them. Dad mentioned them once. It was years ago. He said if anything happened to him, Kastner and Bryce had the important documents. His voice had dropped to something quieter, the particular register of a man remembering a conversation he had not known he would need. I never contacted them after he died because Garrett said he'd handled everything and he exhaled through his nose. I let him. I counted the pause instead of answering it. I let him sit with what I let him meant in this context because it meant something different now than it had an hour ago. The office was quiet around us. Through the window I could see the backyard maple releasing leaves in a slow, steady way that had nothing to do with wind, just the natural loosening of October, everything releasing what it had been holding through the season. I need you to tell me what you want to do, I said finally. He looked at the legal pad. He looked at the accordion folder. He looked at the Irvington listing still open in a second tab on my laptop, though I hadn't pointed it out and wasn't sure he'd registered it. I want to understand what my brother has been doing with my father's company, he said. His voice was very quiet and very steady. I want to understand that before I do anything else. So do I said. From downstairs there was a silence. And then footsteps, Renata's, the careful ones, coming toward the stairs. She stopped at the bottom. I could feel her there the way you can feel a change in pressure. The particular stillness of a person who has stationed themselves at the threshold of a conversation they are not willing to enter directly. Colton. She called up. Presley? Garrett wants to know if everyone's joining us for lunch. Colton looked at me across the desk. I looked at him. Neither of us answered immediately. Then Renata's voice came again, and this time it carried something sharper underneath the cordial surface. A current of the thing she had been building toward since she stood in the kitchen doorway 2 nights ago with her prepared speech and her blue cardigan, and the current said what she could not quite say directly, which was, "Fall in line, this is settled, stop complicating what I have already decided." "We're talking about moving out," she called up. "We're getting there. There's no need to make this difficult." Colton stood up from his chair. He turned toward the door. And I watched his face do something I had not seen it do in 28 months of living in his mother's house. It closed. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just firmly, the way a door closes when someone has finally decided which side of it they're standing on. He called down, "We'll be there in a few minutes, Mom." He turned back to me. "I'm going to call Kastner and Bryce myself," he said. "This afternoon. And whatever they tell me." He stopped. Because from downstairs, clearly audible in the quiet that followed Renata's footsteps retreating toward the kitchen, Garrett's voice came through the floorboards with the flat certainty of someone who had been standing at the bottom of the stairs listening and had decided he had heard enough. "She's not family, Colton. She's your wife. There's a difference. This house belongs to the Beaumonts, and that has never included her, and it never will." The floorboards did not transmit what came next, which was a silence so complete and so specifically shaped that it had its own texture. Colton stood in the doorway of the office with one hand on the frame and his back to me, and I watched the muscles across his shoulders change. Not a flinch, not a recoil, but a settling, the way a structure settles when the last thing holding it in a particular configuration finally gives. He stood like that for 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Then he turned around, and his face was the closed-door face, and something behind it had gone very quiet in a way that was different from the quiet I had seen from him before. This was not the quiet of a man managing discomfort. This was the quiet of a man who had stopped managing. "He's been standing there the whole time," Colton said. "Sounds like it," I said. He looked at me. "Did you hear what he said?" "I heard him," I said. He moved back into the room. He did not sit down. He went to the window that faced the backyard, the maple, copper gold, shedding steadily into the grass, and he stood with his hands at his sides, and he looked out at it for a moment with the particular quality of a man doing arithmetic he did not ask for and cannot stop. "She's not family. She's your wife. There's a difference." He said it flatly, not performing it back to me, just making sure we were both in possession of the same words. "That's what he thinks." "That's what he said," I said. "It's the same thing he thinks." He turned from the window. "Call Kastner and Bryce with me. Right now. I don't want to wait until this afternoon." I picked up my phone. We called from the office with the door closed. The firm's receptionist put us on hold for 4 minutes. For minutes during which neither of us spoke, during which the sounds of the house below continued in their ordinary register, a drawer opening and closing, water running briefly, Tamsin's voice saying something I couldn't make out and Renata's voice answering it, the whole domestic surface of a household conducting itself as though nothing was suspended above it. And then a man named Daniel Bryce came on the line. Measured voice. The particular cadence of an attorney who has delivered news of various weights and has learned to carry all of them at the same register, not as a performance of neutrality, but as a professional habit that has become genuine over time. He sounded like a man who had been waiting specifically for this call. Colton introduced himself. "Warren Beaumont's son," he said. He was calling about BML Holdings, LLC. There was a pause on the line. Not a long one. The pause of a man reaching for a file he has kept near the front of the drawer. "Mr. Beaumont," Bryce said. "I'm glad you called. I want to ask, did you receive our letters?" Colton looked at me. "What letters?" Another pause. "We sent 2 letters to the Arbor Glen Drive address. One 14 months ago and one 11 months ago, via certified mail. They were addressed to both you and your brother, as co-beneficiaries of your father's estate, and they concern the status of BML Holdings and a matter we needed both of you to address in person." A beat. Neither letter was acknowledged. We followed up by phone twice, both times reaching a woman who said she would pass along the message. We didn't receive a call back. Colton's jaw tightened. He said, "I didn't receive any letters." "I see," said Bryce. His voice remained level. "That explains the situation then, in part." He paused. "Mr. Beaumont, I think it would be better if we spoke in person. This afternoon, if you're available. There are documents your father prepared that require your signature, and there are some matters connected to BML Holdings that are, Time-sensitive is perhaps too strong a phrase, but they are matters I've been waiting 2 years to resolve. What kind of documents? Colton said. Your father left a trust structure, Bryce said. BML Holdings was the holding vehicle for the primary asset. That asset has not been distributed, because the distribution required the signatures of both co-beneficiaries, and without both signatures, and without the knowledge of both parties, the process could not proceed. He paused. Mr. Beaumont, the $600 transfers your father's estate sent were our firm's administrative notifications, a signal to both parties that the trust was active and awaiting resolution. A convention your father specified. He wanted you to know something was waiting even if the letters didn't reach you. Colton was very still. What's the primary asset? A property, said Bryce. Commercial and residential mixed use, held in BML Holdings since your father acquired it 19 years ago. We can discuss the details and the current valuation this afternoon. He paused one more time. I should tell you, your brother contacted us 8 months ago. He came to the office. He indicated that you were aware of the asset and that you wished to defer to him entirely on the distribution. He asked us to proceed with a restructuring that would have transferred full ownership to him. We declined without your countersignature and your in-person confirmation. The office was completely quiet. I could hear the maple outside releasing leaves against the window glass, light dry sounds, one and then another. We'll be there at 2 o'clock, Colton said. We left the house at 1:15. I told no one where we were going. I put on my coat and I picked up the accordion folder from my desk, and I went downstairs and through the kitchen where Renata was at the counter slicing bread and Tamsin was at the table with her phone, and I said, "We'll be back for dinner," and I did not stop moving. Renata said, "Presley." "For dinner," I said, and went out through the front door. Outside, the October air was cold and direct, and the street had its copper maple quality, the light coming through at the low sideways angle that made Arbor Glen Drive look like a painting of itself. I walked to my car without looking back at the house. Colton was a few steps behind me. We didn't speak until we were both inside with the doors closed, and then Colton said, 8 months ago, and I said, I know, and we pulled out into the street. Kastner and Bryce occupied the 3rd floor of a narrow brick building on S.W. Morrison, the kind of building that has been in its neighborhood long enough to look inevitable. The sort of building where the elevator is small, and the hallway smells faintly of old carpet, and every door has a frosted glass panel with the firm's name in gold letters, legible and formal, carrying the specific authority of things that have existed long enough to stop trying. The receptionist brought us water without asking, and Daniel Bryce came out to meet us at 2:05. Early 50s. Reading glasses pushed up on his head. A handshake that was firm without performing firmness. The handshake of a man who has stopped needing his handshake to say something. He brought us into a conference room with a long oak table and a window that looked out over the Morrison Bridge and the river beyond it, gray-green in the October light, flat and moving. He set a folder on the table in front of him. He reached across and slid it toward us. I watched his hand push it flat, settle it parallel to the table edge with the automatic care of someone who handles documents all day and has never stopped treating that care as meaningful, and Colton reached forward and opened it. Inside was a document I had not seen before. Not like the transfer confirmations, not like the tax statement or the insurance renewal or the service receipts I had accumulated in my accordion folder over 28 months. This was different in kind, not just in content. 3 pages, dense and formal, with Warren Beaumont's name at the top in the particular typeface of legal instruments prepared with intention, and 2 columns of notarized signatures at the bottom, and in the body of it a description of an asset that took me 2 full readings to absorb even though the words were plain. A mixed-use building on Northeast Alberta Street. 4 commercial units on the ground floor, 6 residential units above. Acquired by Warren L. Beaumont through BML Holdings, LLC 19 years ago for $1.2 million. Current assessed value, per the appraisal attached as Exhibit A. Bryce reached into a second folder as he said this, his hand going in and pulling it free in a single motion, unfolding it slowly and laying it flat beside the trust document so that both instruments were visible simultaneously. $4.7 million. Colton read it twice. I read it once and then I looked at the appraisal and I read that. Your father purchased the building as an investment in his early 50s, Bryce said. He always intended it to go to both sons equally as co-beneficiaries held in the LLC structure until distribution. He was very specific about the co-beneficiary requirement. Both sons, both signatures, no exceptions. He had seen enough estate situations in his professional life where one sibling absorbed everything that he built in a structural safeguard. Bryce folded his hands on the table. When he died, the process should have begun within 60 days of probate closing. It did not begin because your brother, as executor, did not initiate it. When we contacted the address on file, the letters did not reach you. He intercepted them, Colton said. His voice was very flat. I can't make that determination, Bryce said. I can tell you that 2 certified letters were sent to the Arbor Glen address, that our phone follow-ups reached a woman who indicated she would pass along the messages, and that 8 months ago your brother came to this office and represented your wishes in a way that we found insufficient to proceed on without your direct confirmation. The woman on the phone, I said. Did she give a name? Bryce looked at his notes. The first call, she said her name was Renata. I didn't look at Colton. I looked at the appraisal on the table. Exhibit A, the Alberta Street building, for commercial units and 6 residential, $4.7 million, and I counted the pause instead of filling it with the thing I was thinking, which was that Renata had known. Not the full shape of it, perhaps. Perhaps she had understood only that there was a firm calling about Warren's estate, and that Garrett was handling it, and that handling it meant keeping it contained. But she had taken a message that was meant for her son, and she had not passed it along, and when the firm called a second time there was a reasonable chance she had done the same thing, and she had described $336,000 in household contributions as chipping in while simultaneously managing the information flow in a house she intended to hand to her older son. Colton said, "What happens now?" Bryce reached into the second folder again. He pulled out 2 sets of documents, 2 copies of a distribution authorization, each with a signature line, and took them out carefully, unfolding the first one across the table and laying it flat beside the trust document. You sign, he said. Your brother also signs. Once both signatures are obtained, the LLC can proceed with the distribution, either a sale of the asset with proceeds split equally, or a buyout of one party by the other, or a continued co-ownership arrangement. Those are your options. He looked at Colton steadily. What I would recommend, given the circumstances, is that you obtain independent legal counsel before your brother signs anything. The executor's conduct during the estate process may warrant a separate conversation. Colton looked at the signature line. He looked at the trust document with his father's name at the top. He looked at the appraisal. He reached into his jacket pocket for a pen. Not yet, I said quietly. He looked at me. Not until we have our own attorney look at everything, I said. All of it. The executor conduct, the letters, the call logs from this office, the timeline. I looked at Bryce. Is that something your firm can provide? Documentation of your contact attempts? Absolutely, said Bryce. I anticipated you'd want that. I had copies prepared. He reached into the folder a third time and removed a third document, a 1-page summary dated and signed of every contact attempt the firm had made since Warren Beaumont's estate closed, 2 certified letters, 2 phone calls, dates and times, the names given by the person who answered. He set it on the table with the others. I looked at that page for a long moment. Then I reached across the table, picked it up, and read it start to finish. The second certified letter had been sent 11 months ago, the same month as the second $600 transfer. The phone call following it had been made 9 days after the letter, and the note in Bryce's records read, "Spoke with R. Beaumont." She indicated she would inform both sons. No callback received. I set the document back down. I looked at Colton. He was looking at the document too. His face had the quality of a man doing arithmetic that he did not want to finish but could not stop. I want a copy of everything, I said to Bryce. Every document in that folder. The trust, the appraisal, the distribution authorization, the contact log. Of course, he said. He went to the credenza behind him and came back with a set of copies, already prepared. He was that kind of attorney, the kind who prepares for the meeting he expects the client to need rather than the meeting the client thought they were coming to, and handed them to me. I put them in my accordion folder, paper-clipped together, behind the 28 monthly transfer confirmations and the property tax statement and the water heater receipt and the gutter and electrical and furnace records. The folder was substantial now. It had weight that was different from the weight it had carried upstairs on Arbor Glen Drive. The same contents, but the context around them had changed, and context is what gives a document its gravity. We were at the firm for another 40 minutes. During that time, Bryce walked us through the trust structure in detail. The provisions Warren had built in, the specific language around co-beneficiary consent, the way the structural safeguard had been designed to require active participation from both sons rather than passive acquiescence from one. He was careful and precise, and he did not editorialize, but there was a quality to his explanations that suggested a man who had been waiting to give them to the right person for longer than he had expected to wait. He recommended 2 estate attorneys he trusted for independent counsel. When we stood to leave, he shook Colton's hand and then mine, and he held mine for a moment, and he said, "Your father was a thorough man. He built this to be fair. I'm glad one of you finally came in." Outside, we stood on the sidewalk in front of the brick building on S.W. Morrison, and the river was visible at the end of the block, flat and gray and moving through the October afternoon. Colton stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the water for a moment without speaking. $2.35 million, he said. Half the building. His share. Yes, I said. He had it for 19 years and never said anything. He may have meant to, I said. He got sick fast. Garrett knew. It wasn't a question. Garrett knew, I said. And your mother knew something. Maybe not the asset value. But she knew the firm had been calling. He was quiet for a moment. We crossed toward the parking garage, and the river was below us as we walked, visible between buildings, flat and gray and moving. 8 months ago he went to Kastner and Bryce, Colton said. That's 2 months after he told me the company was already dissolved. He sat across from me at Mom's kitchen table and told me there was nothing in it. He exhaled long and slow. And I let it go. You're not letting it go now, I said. He looked at me. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, but with the particular quality of a man who has spent a day encountering the full shape of something he had only seen the surface of, and is deciding what that means about who he is on the other side of it. No, he said. I'm not. In the parking garage, he stopped beside his truck and stood for a moment with his hand on the door handle. How do you want to do this? He said. Tonight. I thought about Magnolia saying have a presentation, not a conversation. I thought about the legal pad with Garrett's words circled on it. I thought about the 3 documents now paper-clipped inside my accordion folder alongside 28 months of a house that had run on my money and my attention without acknowledgement. I thought about the dining room table with the good plates, which I had set myself, which Renata kept in the upper cabinet and brought out only when the children who called ahead came home. I want to do it at the table, I said. The dining room table with everyone present. Tonight. And if Garrett tries to leave? He won't, I said. He thinks he's already won. I looked at the wall of the parking garage, the concrete stained with the particular gray of many seasons. That's the thing about people who believe the outcome is settled. They don't see the need to leave the room. We drove back to Arbor Glen Drive in a quiet that had a different texture than the quiet of the morning. It was the quiet of 2 people holding the same large thing and deciding together how to carry it into a house where 2 other people did not yet know it existed. Colton drove. I held the accordion folder in my lap. He parked on the street behind Garrett's rental. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. The house through the windshield looked the same as it always had. The craftsman porch, the fir columns, the rust-brown dahlias going brittle in the window boxes, the cedar chest just visible through the front window, exactly where it had always been. A beautiful house. Still a beautiful house. I went upstairs without stopping in the kitchen. I sat at my desk and I opened my laptop and I called the estate attorney Bryce had recommended. a woman named Claire Cito, whose firm was in the Lloyd district, and I left a voicemail explaining who I was and what I needed and asked for a call back first thing in the morning. My voice was even as I spoke. I listened to it as though from a slight distance, the way you listen to yourself in a moment you understand you will remember. Then I looked at the legal pad. Garrett's words circled. This house belongs to the Beaumonts. It always has, and it always will. I thought about the Alberta Street building. 4 commercial units. 6 residential. $4.7 million. A man named Warren Beaumont who had been thorough enough to build a structural safeguard into his own estate because he had seen what happened when one sibling absorbed everything. Who had specified that $600 administrative signals be sent to both parties so that even intercepted letters would leave a trace in the one place, a bank account that no one else could manage on your behalf. He had thought of that. He had built that in. I did not know Warren Beaumont except through the newspapers stacked in his sunroom and the water heater he had purchased in 2018 and the fur porch columns he had refinished himself and the company he had registered 14 years ago for the purpose of holding something he intended to divide fairly. But I thought, sitting at my desk in the office on the second floor of his house, that I would have liked him. Dinner was at 7. I set the table myself, the good plates again because I found I wanted the good plates. Not as a statement. Simply because the occasion warranted them and I was the one who knew where they were and how to handle them, the way I had always been the one who knew, and this was the last time I would set this table, and I wanted to do it properly. Renata made pot roast, which was Garrett's favorite and which she made every time he visited for as long as Colton could remember. The smell of it moved through the house from mid-afternoon onward, rich and specific, the smell of a house performing itself. Tamsin opened a bottle of something she'd brought from Sacramento and set it on the table without comment. Garrett sat at the head of the table. Not his chair technically, but the chair at the head, his father's chair, which he occupied with the ease of a man who had been rehearsing the role for years and had stopped noticing that it was a rehearsal. We ate. The conversation moved around the surface of things the way conversation does when everyone at the table is aware of something that is not being named. Garrett asked about Colton's Willamette Valley contract. Tamsin asked Renata about the neighbor's fence situation, which had the particular quality of a question asked by someone filling a silence she does not want to be responsible for. Renata passed the bread. I ate and I said the appropriate things at the appropriate intervals and Colton said less than usual and no one commented on it, which was itself a kind of comment. When the plates were cleared and Renata had brought out coffee, I reached down to my chair where I had hung the accordion folder over the back. I unclipped the section at the back. I reached in and pulled out the documents from Kastner and Bryce, the trust, the appraisal, the contact log, the distribution authorization. I took them out one at a time and I set them on the table in front of me, not opening them yet, just placing them there so that everyone at the table could see that something had arrived in the room that had not been in the room before. Garrett looked at the top document. His face didn't change, but something behind it recalibrated. I could see it, the same flicker I had seen in the office that morning when he looked at the legal pad, there and gone in under a second. What's that? Renata said. Documents from Kastner and Bryce, I said. Warren's attorney. Renata's coffee cup went still halfway to her mouth. Garrett set down his own cup. Colton and I went in today, I said. We had a conversation about BML Holdings, LLC. Renata said, Presley. We saw the trust, I said. We saw the appraisal for the Alberta Street property. I unfolded the appraisal and laid it flat on the table in front of Colton, facing outward so the figure at the top was visible to everyone at the table. We saw the contact log documenting 2 certified letters sent to this address and 2 phone calls made to this number, the first of which you answered, Renata. The dining room was completely quiet. Tamsin had gone very still, her hands in her lap, looking at the table surface with the focused attention of someone who has decided that becoming invisible is the only available option. Garrett had not moved. Colton is a co-beneficiary, I said. Equal share. The distribution requires both signatures. Garrett, you know that because you went to Kastner and Bryce 8 months ago and tried to restructure it without Colton's signature and they turned you away. I unfolded the contact log and laid it flat beside the appraisal, smoothing it once with my palm. This is their record of everything. Garrett said. This is a private family matter. It became less private, I said, when you told me this house belongs to the Beaumonts and that it never has and never will include me. And then I went and spoke to your father's attorney. I reached into the accordion folder one more time and I pulled out the section of monthly transfer confirmations, all 28 paper-clipped by quarter, and I set them on the table. These are the transfers I've made to this household every month for 28 months. $12,000 a month. Property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, repairs. The total is $336,000. I looked at Renata. You called it chipping in. Renata's face had gone the color of old paper. She looked at the stack of confirmations and then at the appraisal and then at her older son. Garrett's voice, when it came, had the forced levelness of a man trying to hold something closed by pressure alone. Whatever you think you've found, Presley, you don't understand the full picture. This is a family matter. It's a Beaumont matter. It has nothing to do with you. This house belongs to the Beaumonts, Colton said. His voice was very quiet. He was looking at his brother across the table. That's what you said to me through the floor this morning. That it always has and it always will. He paused. But the Alberta Street building also belongs to the Beaumonts. To both of us. And you've been managing it alone for 2 years and telling me it didn't exist. Garrett looked at his brother. And for the first time since he had arrived in Portland with his athletic shorts and his commercial real estate broker authority and his mother's approval arranged around him like furniture, Garrett Beaumont did not have an answer that fit the shape of the room. Renata looked at the appraisal. $4.7 million at the top of Exhibit A, clear as a street address. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. Renata looked at me for a long time. Not at the appraisal, not at the transfer confirmations, not at her older son, at me. And what I saw in her face was not the thing I had expected, which was anger, or the thing I might have hoped for, which was remorse. What I saw was something older and more complicated than either of those. It was the expression of a woman who had been telling herself a particular story for 2.5 years and had just encountered, in the form of paper and numbers on a dining room table, the story she had actually been living. She had told herself that we were here as family. That the arrangement was mutual and comfortable, and that whatever Presley and Colton contributed was a gesture. A chip, a gesture, and that the house ran the way houses run, by some ambient force that was not anyone in particular, and was certainly not the woman who stood at the kitchen window every morning at 6:15 and did not sleep in on weekends because the house required attention on weekends too. She had told herself that story for 28 months, and she had believed it with the conviction of a woman who needed it to be true, because the alternative was a story in which she had permitted herself to be subsidized by someone she was, right now, asking to leave in 6 weeks. The room stayed quiet. The pot roast smell was still in the air. Tamsin had her hands in her lap and was looking at the table surface with the focused attention of someone who has made a decision about invisibility and is committed to it. Garrett said, I want to talk to an attorney. That's your right, Colton said. Before anyone signs anything. Nothing's being signed tonight, Colton said. Nothing's being signed without Claire Cito reviewing the full estate file. He looked at his brother with the closed-door face I had watched develop over the course of the day, the face that was not angry in a way that required noise, but settled in a way that did not leave gaps to negotiate through. I'm calling her in the morning. Garrett looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at me. And what crossed his face was the thing that comes after the forced levelness runs out. Not guilt, not contrition, but a recalibration toward whatever the next available position was. He was a man who moved laterally when a door closed in front of him. I could see him doing it in real time, the way you can see someone select a door in a room you know has no other exits. I was protecting the estate, he said. Dad's company had liabilities. If both of us had been pulled into a distribution before those were cleared, it could have cost us more than the asset was worth. I was waiting for the right time. For 2 years, Colton said. These things take time. His voice had found a new register. Reasonable, explanatory, the broker's voice, the voice that had closed many transactions by making the person across the table feel that the terms being offered were self-evidently sensible. I was going to bring you in when it was clean. You went to Kastner and Bryce and told them I'd deferred to you entirely, Colton said. You told them I wanted you to handle the restructuring alone. That's not protecting the estate. That's transferring it. Garrett was quiet. What liabilities? I said. He looked at me. What? You said the company had liabilities. What were they? He said nothing. His jaw moved slightly, the way a jaw moves when a person is selecting from the things they could say and finding none of them adequate. He inhaled sharply once through his nose and looked at the table. Because Kastner and Bryce didn't mention any liabilities, I said. They mentioned an asset held in a clean LLC structure with a current appraisal and an active annual filing. I looked at him steadily. If there were liabilities, they'd be in the estate record. We'll see them when Claire Cito reviews the file. Garrett pushed back his chair and stood up. I'm not going to sit here and be cross-examined by my brother's wife. Colton's the one who's been cross-examining you, I said. I've just been asking about the liabilities. He left the dining room. I heard him go upstairs, the flat-footed weight of him, faster than usual, the particular sound of a man who has run out of room and is converting retreat into purposeful movement to avoid calling it what it is. And then the guest room door. Tamsin looked up from the table surface. She looked at Renata, then at me, then at Colton. I'm sorry, she said quietly. She didn't specify what she was sorry for, which meant she was sorry for the general shape of things and not for anything in particular, which was perhaps the most honest available response and perhaps the only one available to her. She stood and gathered the coffee cups and took them to the kitchen, and I heard water running, and then she too went upstairs. Colton looked at his mother. Renata was looking at the appraisal. She had been looking at it since I'd laid it flat, as though if she looked long enough the number at the top would become something other than what it was. $4.7 million. A building on Alberta Street that had existed in her family for 19 years without her apparently knowing it was there, or knowing it in the partial way that had allowed her to receive 2 certified letters meant for her son and take 2 phone calls from the firm holding her husband's trust and do nothing with either. Mom, Colton said. She looked up. Her eyes were bright in the way that meant she was not going to cry at this table, which was a form of dignity I recognized and gave her credit for. Your father never told me about the building, she said. Not the specifics. He said there was a holding company. He said the boys were taken care of. I didn't, she stopped. I didn't ask about the specifics. That was between Warren and his attorney. But you knew the firm called, Colton said. A long pause. Garrett said he was handling it. He told you not to tell me. She pressed her lips together. It was not a confirmation and it was not a denial, and it lived in the space between them where the things people cannot quite bring themselves to say tend to accumulate. Her hands were flat on the table beside the appraisal, very still, the hands of a woman who has run out of gestures. Did you know about the letters? He said. The first one came when Garrett was visiting, she said. He saw it before I did. He said he'd take care of it. She looked at her hands. I should have asked more questions. I know that. Yes, Colton said. You should have. The dining room held that for a moment. Neither of them looked at me during this exchange, and I did not need them to. I had said what I came to the table to say. The documents were on the table. The numbers were visible. The things that had been invisible for 28 months had arrived in the room in the form of paper and figures, and were now as present as the good plates and the pot roast smell and the appraisal lying flat under the dining room light. I reached across the table and I began to collect the documents. The trust, the appraisal, the contact log, the transfer confirmations, and I put them back in the accordion folder in the order they had come out, organized, paper-clipped. I did it slowly and without drama because I wanted the documents to be handled with care, and also because I needed something to do with my hands while the room resettled around what had just occurred in it. When the folder was organized, I set it beside my chair and I looked at Renata. She was still looking at the table. Then she looked at me, and the expression on her face had changed. The old paper color had shifted to something more particular, and what it held now was the look of a woman who was beginning to understand that the narrative she had been operating inside had been built on a set of figures she had never actually verified. "Chip in." The phrase sat between us without being spoken, and I watched her feel the distance between it and $336,000 the way you feel the distance between a thing you've said and a thing you have to stand behind. "I didn't know it was that much," she said. "What you were paying." "I know," I said. "I thought," she stopped. "Colton said you were helping." I assumed it was, I didn't ask. "No," I said. "You didn't." She was quiet for a moment. "I should have." "Yes," I said. "You should have." It was not an apology. I want to be precise about that. It was an acknowledgement, which is a different thing. Smaller in one way and larger in another, because it requires a person to look at what they've actually done rather than at how they'd like to be seen in relation to it. I did not know, sitting at that table, whether Renata's acknowledgement would grow into something more substantial over time. I did not know whether the partial understanding she had arrived at tonight would expand to include the full weight of what she had allowed to happen. The letters, the calls, her older son's slow management of the inheritance that belonged to both her children equally, and her own willingness to be managed in turn as long as the management pointed in a direction she preferred. I didn't know. But she had said she should have asked. And I had said yes. And that was where we were. Garrett and Tamsin left the next morning. Not dramatically. There was no scene, no final confrontation in the hallway with raised voices and accusations landing like furniture being overturned. Garrett came down with their bags while Renata was making coffee, and Colton was at the kitchen table, and I was at the window with my mug in the place where I always stood at 6:15. He loaded the bags into the rental car with the systematic efficiency of a man converting an uncomfortable departure into a task that could be completed correctly, and he came back in and stood in the kitchen doorway with his coat on. "I'll get my own attorney," he said to Colton. "That's a good idea," Colton said. Garrett looked at me. His face was the face of a man who had spent the night with a door closed and had come out the other side not softened but contracted. Smaller in some essential way, the way people get smaller when a thing they've been standing on top of turns out to have been borrowed. He looked at me the way he had looked at my legal pad the morning before, when he had seen the words BML Holdings LLC written at the top in clean capital letters, and what he was deciding now, I thought, was whether there was anything left to say that would cost him less than silence. He chose silence. Tamsin said goodbye to Renata with a hug that lasted a half-second longer than comfortable, and had in it all the things Tamsin did not have a way to say. The acknowledgement that she had understood more at the dinner table than she had indicated, the awareness that her position in this situation was not a position she had chosen but had arrived in through proximity, the particular discomfort of a person who is adjacent to something they did not cause and cannot fix. Then they were gone, the rental reversing out of the driveway with a sound that was just a car sound, ordinary, the kind that doesn't mean anything except that people are leaving. Renata stood at the kitchen window after they'd gone. She stood where I usually stood, which meant I was at the table with Colton, our positions exchanged. She watched the street long after the car was out of sight. "He'll come around," she said to no one specifically. "He needs time to." "Mom," Colton said. Not unkindly. Just placing a period where she was reaching for something that didn't exist yet. Some version of Garrett that could be recovered toward if enough time passed. Some story in which the thing that had happened last night had a shape that could be managed back into the form the family had always taken. She turned from the window. She looked at us at the table, the two of us with our coffee, and something in her face arranged itself into a shape that was neither the shape of the woman who had stood in the kitchen doorway with her prepared speech about the fourth bedroom, nor the shape of the woman who had looked at the appraisal last night and gone the color of old paper. It was a different shape. More uncertain. Less rehearsed. The face of a woman who has arrived at the edge of a thing she has been circling for a long time and finds it both smaller and larger than she expected. "What happens now?" she said. "Claire Cito reviews the file," Colton said. "Then we see where the estate actually stands and we go from there." "And the house?" Colton looked at her steadily. "That's a separate conversation. But yes. We'll be finding our own place." He looked at me. "We've been meaning to." Renata nodded. She did not say anything else. She poured herself coffee and she went to the sunroom, and after a moment I could hear her in there among the newspaper stacks, the small sounds of a person occupying a room that has always been theirs, thinking thoughts that were presumably now larger and more complicated than they had been 24 hours ago. I called Magnolia that afternoon. She picked up on the first ring, which was unusual enough that I knew she had been waiting. "Tell me," she said. I told her everything. Kastner and Bryce and Daniel Bryce's careful voice and the trust document and the appraisal and the contact log and the dinner table and Garrett's face when the number landed. I told her about Renata and the I should have asked that had arrived in place of an apology and what I had decided that was worth, which was something, not everything, a beginning rather than a resolution, the first installment of an accounting that would take longer than one dinner table to complete. I told her about Garrett leaving this morning with his bags and the half-second hug and the choice of silence. When I finished, Magnolia was quiet for a moment. Not the categorizing quiet, the thinking quiet, which was a different instrument. "The building on Alberta Street," she said. "What are you going to do with it?" "Sell it, most likely," I said. "Split the proceeds the way Warren intended. Colton and I will use our half as the foundation for what comes next." I paused. "There's a house in Irvington. I've had it saved for 8 months. I think it's time to make an offer." "Past time," she said. "Past time," I agreed. She was quiet for another moment. Then, "Presley Ray. Did you say the right things?" I thought about the dining room table. The good plates. The documents laid flat one at a time, each one a different instrument. The trust, the appraisal, the contact log, the 28 transfer confirmations paperclipped by quarter, and Garrett's face contracting around the shape of what he'd lost access to, and Renata's face doing the slower, more complicated work of encountering a figure she'd never asked for and a story she'd been inside without knowing its full dimensions. I said the true things, I said. I think that was enough. It usually is, she said. When they're laid out properly. We made an offer on the Irvington bungalow 3 weeks later, in early November, with the maples fully stripped by then and the street looking clean and cold in the way it does when the leaves are gone and you can finally see the bones of things. The lines of the houses, the shape of the yards, the way a corner lot sits on its land with a particular self-possession that you can only see clearly once the canopy is down. Claire Cito had reviewed the BML Holdings file by then. She had been thorough and quick, which was the combination Bryce's recommendation had prepared me to expect, and what she confirmed was what the contact log had suggested. The estate process had been mishandled in ways that constituted a breach of the executor's fiduciary duty, and Garrett's visit to Kastner and Bryce 8 months ago, his representation of Colton's wishes without Colton's knowledge, his attempt to restructure the distribution in his own favor was documented and would need to be addressed. The specifics of that process were in motion. These things take time. The estate attorneys and the statute and the evidence would do what evidence does when it is properly organized and presented by a careful person to another careful person, and the outcome would arrive in months rather than days, and Colton would be patient with that because he was, now that he understood what he was being patient about, capable of a patience that had a different quality than the passive patience of a man who has let things be handled for him. But the building existed. The trust was intact. Warren Beaumont had been thorough, and Daniel Bryce had been patient, and the structural safeguard had held for 3 years against the pressure of a brother who believed proximity to power was the same thing as owning it. The offer on the Irvington bungalow was accepted on a Tuesday. I was in a coffee shop on Burnside when the call came from our realtor. Not home, not at Arbor Glen Drive, because I had been spending more time outside the house in those 3 weeks than inside it. Not out of antagonism, but out of the simple recognition that the house had been running itself fine, actually, for its entire history, and would continue to do so, and that my presence in it had always been a contribution and never a requirement, and that I was ready to make my contributions somewhere that would know they were being made. I stepped outside to take the call. The November air was cold and direct, the kind that makes everything sharper and closer, the kind that reminds you that the world has edges. I stood on the sidewalk and listened to the realtor say accepted, full ask, they want a 30-day close, and I said, that's great. Thank you. And I hung up and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my phone in my hand and the cold air moving and the city making its ordinary sounds all around me. I felt something that I had not felt in 28 months, something that had been waiting under the arrangement and the accordion folder and the 6:15 mornings at the kitchen window and the sticky door handle that had never been fixed and the good plates I had washed by hand so many times the pattern on the rim had begun to soften. I did not have a name for it that was precise enough to be worth using. It was adjacent to relief but larger, and adjacent to satisfaction but quieter, and it had the quality of a door opening into a room that has been prepared and is finally ready to be entered. I called Colton. He picked up on the second ring. "They accepted," I said. He exhaled, long, slow, the sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding for longer than he'd known he was holding it. "Irvington," he said. "Corner lot," I said. "Original hardwood. The kitchen window faces east." "I know," he said. "You've been showing me the listing for 8 months. 7, I said. He laughed. It was the real one, the lower register. "I'll be home by 6. I almost said home back, and then I realized he meant Arbor Glen Drive, and then I realized it didn't matter, because in 30 days home would mean something new, and the word would fit it properly for the first time in a long while. We moved out on a Saturday in late November. I had called the movers on a Thursday, 2 days after the accepted offer, because there had been a particular satisfaction in the speed of it, in having the number of the moving company already written on a sticky note on my desk, because I had put it there 4 months ago against the day we finally decided to go. They arrived at 8 in the morning with a truck and 3 efficient men who wrapped things in moving blankets and carried them down the porch stairs with an economy of motion that I found genuinely pleasing. The pleasure of watching people do a job well, which is different from the pleasure of doing a job well yourself but is related to it, a pleasure that comes from competence being visible. Renata watched from the kitchen doorway. She had offered to help and I had thanked her and told her it was organized. She made coffee and left a mug on the kitchen counter for me, the good kind she had ordered Stumptown, I noticed, sometime in the past 3 weeks, a bag of it in the cabinet above the refrigerator, in the spot where I had always kept mine. It was a small thing. The smallest possible thing, maybe. I drank the coffee. By noon the truck was loaded. I did a walkthrough of the rooms we'd used. The office, the sitting room, the bedroom. I stood in the doorway of the 4th bedroom for a moment. The room with the window facing the backyard maple, the yellow curtains that had never been changed, the room I had kept closed for 2.5 years because it was not mine to open. I didn't go in. I just looked at it from the doorway. The maple outside the window, bare now, its branches clean and particular against the November sky, everything stripped down to its true shape. I thought that was a good note to leave on. Colton carried the last box down. I carried the accordion folder. At the front door, Renata stood in the hallway beside the cedar chest. She was in the blue cardigan with the wooden buttons. She looked older than she had looked 3 weeks ago, or perhaps I was simply seeing her more accurately. The particular clarity that arrives when a story has been corrected and you are looking at the person it was about without the version you had been carrying. A 67-year-old woman in a large craftsman house with 4 bedrooms and her husband's newspapers in the sunroom and the complicated knowledge of what she'd allowed and what she hadn't asked and what her older son had been doing in the space of her not asking. A woman who had ordered Stumptown coffee and left it in the cabinet where she knew I kept mine. She hugged Colton for a long time. He hugged her back. That was real and I did not make anything of it. Then she looked at me. "I want you to know," she said, "that I'm going to fix the door. The one from the kitchen to the garage." I looked at her for a moment. "I reported that twice," I said. "I know," she said. "I'm going to fix it." It was not an apology for the letters or the phone calls or the 2.5 years of chipping in or the prepared speech in the kitchen or Garrett coming downstairs with his borrowed authority and his mother's approval arranged around him like furniture, telling me this was a family matter, telling me this wasn't personal, pouring my French press into his mug and taking it upstairs. It was not any of those things. It was a sticky handle on a door that had needed fixing for 28 months, finally being acknowledged as something that should have been fixed. I thought about Magnolia saying it usually is when it's laid out properly. I thought about what usually is leaves room for. The things that take more time, the reckonings that arrive in small installments rather than all at once, the way acknowledgement sometimes precedes understanding by months or years and is still worth something in the interval. "Thank you," I said. I picked up the accordion folder and I walked out of the house on Arbor Glen Drive and down the porch stairs. The original fir columns, beautiful, the last of the rust-brown dahlias finally dead in the window boxes, and I got into my car and Colton got into his truck, and we drove in two-car convoy through the stripped November streets of Portland toward the corner lot in Irvington and the kitchen window that faced east. Behind us, the house on Arbor Glen Drive stood the way it had always stood. It would continue to stand. It belonged to the Beaumonts. It always had. Now so, finally, did the Alberta Street building. All of it distributed as intended, the way a thorough man had arranged it 19 years ago, and his attorney had waited 3 patient years to deliver. All of it exactly as Warren Beaumont had meant it to be. There are a few things this story kept showing me as I wrote it. Invisible labor doesn't disappear because no one names it. It accumulates, quietly, like interest, and eventually the ledger gets read. The people who tell you something is a family matter usually mean it's a matter they've already decided. The question is whether you let their version of the story be the only one in the room. A thorough person, preparing carefully, can protect someone they love across years and distance, even from beyond the end of their own life. Warren Beaumont built a safeguard. It held. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real emotional truths many families carry. If this reminded you of your own family, the invisible work, the money that went unacknowledged, the inheritance that almost disappeared, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe for the next one.